composition is, I would say, the main thing of creating a photo. You have to consciously think about what you're creating, so how to compose this image. So first of all, you know, when you take a photo, it's you, the photographer, and the person that is photographed. So the distance or the focal length or whatever you put between you and the subject makes the difference. And whatever you choose to put, because I mean, let's give an example. You can go as close as this, you know, in this case there's a reason I want to have a close-up or his tattoo, or you can go as far as that, even more, because in this case I was in beautiful Como lake and she's La Ruga Glacier and doing a very interesting pose, but I wanted to have the whole picture, almost like postcard. When you say, oh, look at that, there's also someone doing yoga. So among these two opposites, the extreme close-ups and the wide-angle kind of scene like that, of course there's a middle ground, that is the middle ground you most probably will use in your photos. Finding that middle ground helps us to define what we mean when we talk about composition. So composition, I think, is basically the interaction between the subject and the background. And here things are getting really interesting, because it's where many photography rules comes into, and we will see the rules and see which are most important, in my opinion, for composition. So rule number one for me, that is the main, the one that, you know, that makes all the other rules like inexistent, is perspective. Perspective is everything. Look at that. Okay, I'm sure you won't be always that lucky to have two twins, like in this case. You know, when you don't have a twin couple, you know, we can mimic the idea of creating a twin like that with a nice reflection. Okay, but we're not talking about that when we think about perspective. If we, as we said before, define composition as the relation between the subject and the background, it might be easier to find the perspective into the leading lines of the background and placing in a very strategic place the subject, usually in the middle of these leading lines. Let's give some examples. Look at this. This is in Milan. I took this photo very early in the morning, not to have people. There's one blurred in the background. It's this building, even if blurred, is out of focus, because I liked it to focus on the subject, but you know, it's clearly leading lines, and we have a person in the middle. It's quite powerful. Look here is the same principle. The lines are leading your attention towards the subject. That is exactly what we want. We want people to look at the subject, to say, oh wow, it's a great pose, she's amazing, you know? And this is what all the composition helps. Look at here, same thing. You see the subject is exactly in the middle, and the lines from all directions are leading to the subject. Let's go from a very classical background to industrial location, but same, you see, it's the same principle. You know, there are so many examples I can give you, because it's really a technique that I love. So you might have seen that the subject in this case was usually in the middle. This is not necessarily something that it's reading the golden rules of photography, because one of the golden rules of photography is the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds basically is very easily applied, dividing the space in thirds. So if you draw 3 lines vertically and 3 lines horizontally, the result will be 9/3 of the space. So I show you some photos when I applied the rule of third, like this one, this one. This is very, I think, good example. Also because of the horizon line. I kept the horizon line exactly and the same height of the feet. So seems almost she's walking on water. Yeah? Plus is in the third part of the image. An interesting use of space is what is called the De Chirico effect. So De Chirico was a painter that lived in the first part of the 20th century in Italy, and he created this iconic space that is called the metaphysical space. For him, the surrounding, the location, was a representation of the mind. He was usually using these spaces with a lot of columns and neoclassical structures, but very minimalistic. I mean, here are just some examples where I imitate a little bit, get inspired by this use of space. But you know, I most generally, when I keep the subject smaller and I'm more into the architecture, I always have in my mind the De Chirico space. And I think it's this kind of use of space and composition that is quite effective for this kind of photography. When you see this kind of images, when the subject is not filling all the space, there's something that we can talk about that is called negative space. Look at here, for example. Actually, this was for a head for his leggings. Here is also negative space, a lot of negative space with stairs. I love stairs. Here is taken from a drone, also negative space. This is another use of negative space. The intention was to give the more power possible to the nature, you know, to show him this forest, tree, the sun, whatever. And so almost showing that the person is not really important towards like the grand plan that the nature has. Here is an interesting use of negative space and keeping the subject small, because again it gives an idea, oh wow, that's kind of scary almost. It's kind of a challenge between, you know, the person and nature and whatever. It makes adrenalinic the picture. This is exactly the same location in the same photo shooting, just taken with another lens and a different perspective. They're both valid as photos, but you know, different result. So this is a very effective technique. I would say that it's very effective if you are photographing for website uses or outdoor advertising, posters, stuff like that, when you have like kind of a 2/3, 69th ratio or this kind of ratios, and you don't really have then to crop it for Instagram or to use it squared or vertical. It could also be done, of course, in a vertical picture, but usually on Instagram especially we want to fill the frame a little bit more. Let's go back to a picture that I showed you already. This in a way also applies the rule of third, because you see the two partitions behind the Baba are exactly placed there in the points of attention. That said, again, oh, Deepika, I can just make a course like using my friend Deepika Mehta. She's really incredible and so photogenic, and I really love to shoot with her. This is in Milan, you probably know. Again, she's kind of in the middle. Something that I really recommend to use in the composition is use elements of the location to open a dialogue with the subject and frame it in a way. Like here, Visvalini's temple is on the background, the door frames perfectly the person. Here again, a door and the frame again. This is a very beautiful door, but finding a door or a big window or something like that, I think it's something that you can find almost anywhere. So when you have it, use it, because it adds something to the picture, and it gives more attention to the subject, so I really recommend it. You can always find probably a frame such as perfect as that, but if you have it, use it. I think another example of a composition that I really like is this specular mirroring effect. You remember the first that we saw with the twins, and that can be easily done with water reflection. I really love that with water reflection. It's an effect that I really like, and that creates an interesting composition. I mean, again, don't overdo it, because then, you know, it gets all the same. But you can do this with reflection, you can do this with shadows. It's not exactly the same with shadows, but shadows can be also interesting. You know, there might be many other more creative ways to compose the image and to use the space, and especially when you do a photo shooting in a city or wandering around, whatever, you might find things like that. You know, you can use it, and it's interesting. The main rule, I think, is, but it's not a rule, is opening your mind and get creative and getting the flow. Okay, so that's all today for composition.